We are back with Weather for Weather Geeks on this Tuesday evening. We got a lot to get through this evening, including some explaining about recent forecasts and kind of talking about why our winter is once again kind of turning out to be a bit of a lame one. Here's a look at the high temperature numbers so far in February. And you know, when you factor in both the highs, which are displayed, and the low temperatures, we're running 11 degrees plus, warmer than average, almost halfway through the month. This is putting us on track for another almost record warm February after we just did this a year ago. And of course, we've had very little snow to speak of as well. I've gotten a few comments on social media kind of requesting a little bit of an explanation about some of our recent winters, especially the last couple. And, you know, I kind of boil it down to three main things, especially for this winter in particular. Now, in the background, of course, climate change. The climate is warming. We're going to have cold and snowy winters in the future, but the odds of any particular winter being cold and snowy are lower because of the warming climate. Just like, you know, the analogy I like to use when I talk about climate change is if you're a baseball fan, you remember the late 90s home run hitters. Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, the ball was flying out of ballparks, records were being set. Now, can you say that each and every one of those home runs was because they were on steroids? No, but because they were on steroids, as it turns out, the odds of any individual at-bat resulting in a home run were higher, just like with climate change. The odds of extreme weather events are higher, the odds of a cold and snowy winter are lower, but they're not zero in this kind of a climate. Now, that's kind of lurking in the background. On a seasonal scale, this year we're dealing with El Nino, and it turns out El Nino was pretty strong this year. Not going to be one of the 2 or 3 strongest on records, but it's going to be in the top 5. And El Nino can bring us a variety of types of winters, but a strong El Nino, if it's a strong one, that tilts the odds in favor of warmer than average temperatures in our part of North America. Also, on kind of that seasonal scale, the polar vortex. Things have been inhospitable for cold in the eastern U.S., not only in the oceans, the Pacific Ocean, even out towards the Indian Ocean, but high in the atmosphere up above the polar regions. It's been inhospitable up there. And what do I mean by that? The polar vortex, as long as it's mostly over the North Pole, it's going to hog most of the really cold weather up there in the very high latitudes. Now, every now and then, the polar vortex meanders and wanders. You may hear some talk sometimes about sudden stratospheric warmings and things like that. We've had one of those this winter. We might have another one before this month is through. But so far, when the polar vortex has been disrupted or kicked off of the pole, it's gone over to Asia and Europe mostly, and that's going to keep most of the cold air on the other side of the planet as opposed to eastern parts of North America. Back here in the near term, what a fiasco this storm was. Not only here, but perhaps an even bigger fiasco just a few hours to our east. There were parts of far northern Pennsylvania, southern New York, that had a pretty decent chance of seeing double-digit snowfall totals with this storm, and they ended up getting not a flake. Now, we didn't have a flake around here, and we had a 2 to 4 inch forecast. That was bad enough, but it was even worse a couple of hours to our northeast. But this was a pretty sizable event, and something they haven't dealt with in a couple of years in places like New York City, and there was accumulating snow down to Washington, Philadelphia, up towards Boston as well. So millions upon millions of people had a pretty decent snow event today. But for us, you know, what a frustrating storm. You know, we put out a snow map Sunday morning because it was time. We had to. Snow was looking like it was coming Monday night. It's time to get the forecast out. And we put out a map showing 2 to 4 inches for our area, and then almost immediately, high-resolution models started rolling in, showing a dramatic southward shift. Not just a subtle shift, but a dramatic shift. It's not often in my career, and I've been doing this, for over 20 years now. I haven't seen that many late in the game shifts that dramatic that I can remember, where a storm, is 24 to 36 hours away, and the storm track shifts dramatically. Subtle shifts are very common at that time scale, but usually a storm shift like that occurs on days 5 or 6, not 24 to 36 hours out. So what a frustrating storm here locally, and for many meteorologists across the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic states. But as I said, it was a pretty decent snow event in a lot of places in the eastern U.S., just not around here. We actually had a pretty nice looking day today before the clouds thickened up this afternoon. Some snow flurries have been ongoing, but all this is inconsequential. A couple of flurries will be around this evening into parts of the overnight. And tomorrow, of course, is Valentine's Day. There's a lot to love weather-wise this year. Now, it is going to be a chillier day, but hey, it's just back to average. It's not like it's going to be 20 degrees all day tomorrow. It'll be in the 20s at the start of the day, but we're looking for 37 in the afternoon. That is right exactly where we should be on February the 14th. In the afternoon, will be bright and sunny after some fair weather clouds in the morning. No rain, of course, no snow. Roads will be dry. No problems for our Valentine's Day here locally. And, Valentine's Day is always on February the 14th, so that's one of the tidier days as far as record keeping goes when it comes to the weather. Our snowiest Valentine's Day back in 1960, we had 5.2 at the Youngstown Warren Airport. The most overall precipitation was a decade earlier in 1950, and the warmest 1938, 68 balmy degrees. The coldest daytime high on Valentine's Day was back in 1979. The high temperature that day was just 15 degrees. All right, so Valentine's Day is looking good. We've had some data ingestion issues this afternoon, so our model's going to kind of lock up here, but the fronts are still going to appear. And the one thing I want to draw your attention to is this front on Thursday. This is our next weather maker, and even though, again, we're not getting any data here to show the precipitation, there's going to be a band of showers accompanying this front, it looks like, Thursday afternoon, mostly between about 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. In the wake of that front, maybe a scattering of flurries then for parts of the overnight. Then we'll be keeping an eye on this guy on the edge of the screen. This is our next weather maker, and this is kind of a classic Alberta Clipper system. Coming out of the Canadian prairies, kind of dumbbelling through the mid-Mississippi Valley, and this might go to our south, far enough to the south where we just get a couple of flurries. But Friday night, if it takes a little more of a northerly track, I could see where Friday night, we have some light snow and maybe some modest accumulations. I could see that scenario, but I could also see it taking a little more of a southerly track and it being not much of a big thing at all for us. And even if it does take that more northerly track, it's not like it's a 10-inch snowstorm, but I could see maybe, a couple inches or something like that if a more northerly track with that Clipper ends up being right. But, while it is going to be cold for a couple of days behind that system, in fact, Saturday, one of our colder days in recent memory, 30 degrees in mid-February, is usually nothing to write home about, but hey, in this kind of a pattern, that's a pretty cold-looking day. And there'll be a brisk wind as well. But after that, we're back to average by Sunday, and then next week, we're back to the 40s. And, I don't see much in the way of sustained cold in the longer range. We're not going to close the book on winter, certainly. I would never do that on February the 13th. But as far as meteorological winter, December, January, February, it's hard to see much in the way of cold and snow for the rest of the month and the rest of the season, which, again, meteorological winter technically ends February 29th this year. But, we got March to get through. It can even snow around here into early April, so we're not going to close the book on winter by any stretch. But as of right now, I don't think the pattern will be very hospitable at all for any sort of, big-ticket winter weather events in the final 2 weeks or so of meteorological winter. That's it for me on this Tuesday evening weather for Weather Geeks. Thanks for hanging with me and letting me kind of spill my guts a little bit as far as, or just sort of whine a little bit, if you will, as far as the weather forecast over the last few days. It's been a frustrating go of it in the weather department, but again, nothing like that will threaten us again anytime real soon, with the exception maybe of that Clipper Friday night. Again, thank you for watching. I'll see you back here on Wednesday.